Welcome to a special edition of the Tyler's Place podcast. I'm your host, Maynard Edwards. I've always wanted to do a full recording of the Declaration of Independence, and the July 4th holiday certainly gives us the opportunity to do that. A lot of connection between Freemasonry and the Declaration of Independence. So before we get into the reading, let's set the stage a little bit with the Grand Archivist of the Supreme Council of the Scottish Rite, the one and only Arturo de Hoyos. Art, the Declaration of Independence, and Freemasonry.
We always hear the story about, how many presidents were Masons, how many of the founding fathers were Masons. People will make various claims. Half the generals that fought on our side, and maybe half the generals on the other side, but were Masons. But in any case, I have looked this up, and there's not really a firm consensus. Generally, it's believed that 9 is the number of signers on the Declaration that had a Masonic tie. Some people say 8, others say up to 11. And I can read the names of those that we know for sure and then give the ones that are a bit questionable here. Of course, we have Benjamin Franklin, Eldridge Gerry, John Hancock, William Hooper, Richard Stockton, Matthew Thornton, George Walton, and William Whipple. Those ones are pretty well accepted as authentic.
So those guys we know are Masons. Those are the factual ones. Obviously, Ben Franklin. I mean, we've got those nailed. John Hancock, again, another one. But then there's some of the lesser-known characters.
Right. Now, there's some other people that are listed as members of the fraternity that where their names were listed as a visitor of attending a particular lodge, or they may have been buried with Masonic honors and were said to have been present at a particular meeting or something. And the best known of those are Joseph Hughes, Robert Treat Payne, and Thomas McKean. There's another person, John Penn, who is said to have attended lodges in North Carolina, but we really don't know. Lyman Hall was claimed to have been a member of a lodge in Georgia. And there are a couple like this, people who have been claimed to have visited lodges, but we really don't know for sure. So I'd say we're safe in saying 8, probably 9 of the members or of the signers were Freemasons, but it's possible that there were close to twice that many.
Jefferson, who's the primary author of the document, was not, in fact, a Mason. We're pretty sure of that. And I've heard this is because he was a deist, so that was sort of considered an atheist-type thing, even though, we wouldn't necessarily say that today. Where's the truth and the innuendo in that one?
Well, Jefferson was actually my favorite president, so I would like to say that I'm holding out the hope that he was a Freemason. And I don't know that people prohibited deists from being Masons at the time. The constitutions, of course, say that you couldn't be a stupid atheist. But there were many people at that time that were deists. I mean, this was the age of enlightenment, and I think they were doing more of getting rid of some of the credulous notions as to what God was or God wasn't, and Jefferson was certainly among the brightest of our founding fathers. So I like to hold out the hope that perhaps he was a Mason. Some people claim that he was. I think there was a reference to him as Brother Jefferson.
He had family members who were Masons.
That's what I understand. And that's the case with a lot of the founding fathers, is some of it is by innuendo. They'll say that this particular signer of the Declaration was a Mason, but there's no proof of that, but we know that his brother was. And this was very common, of course, because Freemasonry was popular among those types of men at the time.
My favorite signer of the Declaration, not a Mason, but I love this guy, Charles Carroll of Carrollton. Gave the king his address. I mean, at the time, these guys are signing in their own death warrant if they don't win this war. They're going to be hung as treasonous. And this guy says, and whether or not he really meant it that way or it was just his habit to sign it that way, and he did. I think it's cool that he said, "Hey, come get me, King George."
Absolutely. I mean, these men would have been hanged as traitors. And when you read the words, I get chills thinking about it, because they pledged to each other their mutual support, the sacred honor. And they were doing this by their lives. I mean, they were well aware that had they been captured, they would have been hanged.
And without further introduction, the Declaration of Independence of the United States of America. In Congress, July 4th, 1776. The unanimous declaration of the 13 United States of America. When in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Prudence indeed will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes. And accordingly, all experience hath shewn that mankind are more disposed to suffer, while evils are sufferable, than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object, evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty, to throw off such government, and to provide new guards for their future security. Such has been the patient sufferance of these colonies, and such is now the necessity which constrains them to alter their former systems of government. The history of the present King of Great Britain is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations, all having in direct object the establishment of an absolute tyranny over these states. To provide this, let facts be submitted to a candid world. He has refused his assent to laws, the most wholesome and necessary for the public good. He has forbidden his governors to pass laws of immediate and pressing importance unless suspended in their operation till his assent should be attained, and when so suspended, he has utterly neglected to attend them. He has refused to pass other laws for the accommodation of large districts of people, unless those people would relinquish the right of representation in the legislature, a right inestimable to them and formidable to tyrants only. He has called together legislative bodies at places unusual, uncomfortable, and distant from the depository of their public records, for the sole purpose of fatiguing them into compliance with his measures. He has dissolved representative houses repeatedly for opposing with manly firmness his invasions on the rights of the people. He has refused for a long time after such dissolutions to cause others to be elected, whereby the legislative powers, incapable of annihilation, have returned to the people at large for their exercise, the state remaining in the meantime exposed to all the dangers of invasion from without and convulsions from within. He has endeavored to prevent the population of these states for that the purpose of obstructing the laws for naturalization of foreigners, refusing to pass others to encourage their migrations hither, and raising the conditions of new appropriations of lands. He has obstructed the administration of justice by refusing his assent to laws for establishing judiciary powers. He has made judges dependent on his will alone for the tenure of their offices and the amount and payment of their salaries. He has erected a multitude of new offices and sent hither swarms of officers to harass our people and eat out their substance. He has kept among us, in times of peace, standing armies without the consent of our legislatures. He has affected to render the military independent of and superior to the civil power. He has combined with others to subject us to jurisdiction foreign to our Constitution and acknowledged by our laws, giving his assent to their acts of pretended legislation, for quartering large bodies of armed troops among us, for protecting them by mock trial from punishment for any murders which they should commit on the inhabitants of these states, for cutting off our trade with all parts of the world, for imposing taxes on us without our consent, for depriving us in many cases of the benefit of trial by jury, for transporting us beyond seas to be tried for pretended offenses, for abolishing the free system of English laws in a neighboring province, establishing therein an arbitrary government and enlarging its boundaries so as to render it at once an example and fit instrument for introducing the same absolute rule into these colonies, for taking away our charters, abolishing our most valuable laws, and altering fundamentally the forms of our governments, for suspending our own legislatures and declaring themselves invested with power to legislate for us in all cases whatsoever. He has abdicated government here by declaring us out of his protection and waging war against us. He has plundered our seas, ravaged our coast, burnt our towns, and destroyed the lives of our people. He is at this time transporting large armies of foreign mercenaries to complete the works of death, desolation, and tyranny already begun with circumstances of cruelty and perfidy, scarcely paralleled in the most barbarous ages, and totally unworthy the head of a civilized nation. He has constrained our fellow citizens, taken captive on the high seas to bear arms against their country, to become the executioners of their friends and brethren, or to fall themselves by their hands. He has excited domestic insurrections among us, and he has endeavored to bring on the inhabitants of our frontiers the merciless Indian savages whose known rule of warfare is an undistinguished destruction of all ages, sexes, and conditions. In every stage of these oppressions, we have petitioned for redress in the most humble terms. Our repeated petitions have been answered only by repeated injury. A prince whose character is thus marked by every act which may define a tyrant is unfit to be the ruler of a free people. Nor have we been wanting in attentions to our British brethren. We have warned them from time to time of attempts by their legislature to extend an unwarrantable jurisdiction over us. We have reminded them of the circumstances of our emigration and settlement here. We have appealed to their native justice and magnanimity, and we have conjured them by the ties of our common kindred to disavow these usurpations, which would inevitably interrupt our connections and correspondence. They too have been deaf to the voice of justice and consanguinity. We must therefore acquiesce in the necessity which denounces our separation and hold them, as we hold the rest of mankind, enemies in war, in peace, friends. We therefore, the representatives of the United States of America, in General Congress, assembled, appealing to the Supreme Judge of the world for the rectitude of our intentions, do, in the name and by the authority of the good people of these colonies, solemnly publish and declare that these united colonies are, and of right ought to be, free and independent states, that they are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is and ought to be totally dissolved, and that as free and independent states, they have full power to levy war, conclude peace, contract alliances, establish commerce, and to do all other acts and things which independent states may of right do. And for the support of this declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. New Hampshire, Josiah Bartlett, William Whipple, Matthew Thornton. Massachusetts, John Hancock, Samuel Adams, John Adams, Robert Treat Payne, Elbridge Gerry. Rhode Island, Stephen Hopkins, William Ellery. Connecticut, Roger Sherman, Samuel Huntington, William Williams, Oliver Wolcott. New York, William Floyd, Philip Livingston, Francis Lewis, Lewis Morris. New Jersey, Richard Stockton, John Witherspoon, Francis Hopkinson, John Hart, Abraham Clark. Pennsylvania, Robert Morris, Benjamin Rush, Benjamin Franklin, John Morton, George Clymer, James Smith, George Taylor, James Wilson, George Ross. Delaware, Caesar Rodney, George Reed, Thomas McKean. Maryland, Samuel Chase, William Paca, Thomas Stone, Charles Carroll of Carrollton. Virginia, George Wythe, Richard Henry Lee, Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Harrison, Thomas Nelson Jr., Francis Lightfoot Lee, Carter Braxton. North Carolina, William Hooper, Joseph Hughes, John Penn. South Carolina, Edward Rutledge, Thomas Hayward Jr., Thomas Lynch Jr., Arthur Middleton. Georgia, Button Gwinnett, Linman Hall, George Walton. Thanks for listening. Happy 4th of July, everybody, and may God bless America.